At dawn on April 17, 2021, in Richmond, Virginia, the lifeless body of a young woman was discovered in a desolate area near the stadium used by the Richmond Hounds women's rugby team. The scene was grim. The victim lay face down on a patch of uneven grass, her arms positioned unnaturally beneath her body. Blood had pooled beneath her head, soaking into the ground. A faint chill lingered in the early morning air, and the first responders noted the eerie silence surrounding the location. A forensic medical examiner was called to the scene and quickly identified a significant injury on the back of the victim's head. The wound was consistent with blunt force trauma, but the exact weapon could not be determined at the scene. There were no other visible injuries, suggesting the attack had been swift and targeted. The absence of personal belongings, no wallet, phone, or jewelry, added to the complexity, hinting at a possible robbery staged to misdirect investigators. Nearby, a jogger who had reported the body stood visibly shaken, recounting how they stumbled upon the scene. The area was sparsely lit by street lamps, and despite being close to the stadium, it was not a place frequented after dark. Crime scene technicians meticulously combed the surroundings, placing evidence markers near disturbed patches of grass and faint footprints leading to a narrow path behind the stadium. No obvious murder weapon was found nearby, deepening the mystery. By mid-morning, the team coach arrived, summoned by the authorities to assist with identification. He recognized the victim immediately as Angela Roberts, a 23-year-old rising star in women's rugby. Angela was widely regarded as a promising athlete, with a future that likely included a spot on the national team. The coach described her as disciplined, talented, and determined, qualities that had earned her respect within the team and beyond. However, his demeanor shifted when asked about the team's dynamics, hinting at recent tensions within the group. Detectives began preliminary interviews with players who had arrived early for the day's practice. The athletes appeared shocked and unsettled, many struggling to process the news of Angela's death. When pressed, some acknowledged that the team had experienced disputes recently, though they refrained from naming specific individuals involved. Their reluctance raised suspicions, but the officers held off drawing conclusions. Meanwhile, forensic specialists continued their work, collecting fibers from Angela's uniform and examining the soles of her cleats for trace evidence. The stadium security footage was requested, with detectives focusing on the hours leading up to Angela's death. Initial reviews suggested that Angela had returned to the stadium late the previous evening, though the reasons for her visit remained unclear. As the first day of the investigation unfolded, the authorities found themselves with more questions than answers. The violent end of Angela Roberts, a young athlete on the cusp of greatness, cast a shadow not only over her team but also over the entire community that had rallied behind her success. The details surrounding her death hinted at something far more complex than a random act of violence, setting the stage for an investigation that would unravel secrets no one had anticipated. Police investigators began their inquiry by visiting Angela Roberts' family home in a quiet suburban neighborhood of Richmond. Her parents, visibly shaken, described Angela as a determined and disciplined young woman who had always pursued her goals with unwavering focus. Her father, a retired teacher, recounted how the family had relocated to Richmond 3 years prior, specifically to support Angela's athletic aspirations. Her mother mentioned that Angela had been reserved in her personal life, often spending her free time practicing or studying game strategies rather than socializing. They insisted they knew of no threats or conflicts in her life, but their statements hinted at an underlying distance between them and their daughter. The detectives documented the family's account, noting Angela's apparent secrecy about her personal relationships. They retrieved photographs, trophies, and other personal items from her room, hoping to uncover clues. Among Angela's belongings, they found her training schedules, a handwritten journal filled with motivational quotes, and several team photographs. Nothing immediately suggested any signs of trouble or unresolved issues. Back at the station, investigators turned their attention to Angela's team. Several players arrived for routine questioning, appearing subdued and visibly unnerved by the tragedy. Most offered little beyond expressing shock and grief, but one teammate, Nicole, caught the attention of the detectives. When asked about internal conflicts within the team, Nicole averted her gaze, fidgeting with her hands. Her hesitation was subtle but noticeable, prompting the officers to make a note for follow-up questioning. Meanwhile, the crime scene team provided the first set of forensic findings. The wound on Angela's head was consistent with being struck by a blunt object, likely something heavy and cylindrical. The lack of defensive wounds suggested she may not have seen the attack coming, or that it had occurred during a brief and heated encounter. Her missing personal items deepened the mystery, though no unusual transactions or activity had been reported on her bank accounts or phone records thus far. As part of the investigation, police reviewed security footage from the stadium. The grainy recordings showed Angela entering the facility alone the night before her body was found. A few minutes later, another figure appeared on the footage, wearing a dark hoodie. Although the individual's face was obscured, their gait and posture seemed familiar. The figure followed Angela into the locker room, and while no further footage captured their actions, the timeline matched the approximate window of Angela's death. The discovery raised immediate questions. Who was this person, and why were they meeting Angela so late at night? Detectives began to reconstruct Angela's recent movements, interviewing friends, coaches, and staff associated with the team. They learned that Angela had been particularly driven in recent weeks, often staying late after practice to work on her skills. However, this dedication had not gone unnoticed by her teammates. Several players mentioned growing tensions within the team, particularly around the starting lineup changes that had elevated Angela to a key position. One player, Layla, had openly expressed frustration about losing her spot to Angela, though she vehemently denied any involvement in the incident. As the investigation progressed, investigators pieced together an emerging portrait of Angela's life. She was a fiercely competitive athlete with a bright future, but one whose ambition might have inadvertently created friction among those around her. The figure in the hoodie became the focal point of the case, and detectives intensified their efforts to identify them. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses was requested, and additional interviews were scheduled to uncover any hidden connections. By the end of the second day, the investigators were left with a trail of fragmented clues. Angela's drive, the apparent tensions among her teammates, and the mysterious figure on the security footage all hinted at deeper complexities. While the team publicly mourned the loss of their star player, detectives worked quietly to unravel the web of secrets surrounding her final hours. The investigation into Angela Roberts' murder began to unravel as detectives pursued several potential leads, only to find themselves mired in dead ends. Initial theories suggested that Angela's death might be linked to the world of illegal betting. As a rising star in women's rugby, her matches had started attracting the attention of local gamblers. The Richmond Hounds were gearing up for a critical championship, and Angela's performance could influence the odds. Detectives interviewed local bookmakers and examined her financial records, searching for signs of suspicious transactions or coercion. However, her accounts were clean, and no evidence surfaced to suggest Angela had been involved in gambling activities or had been pressured by outsiders. The team's coach, previously cooperative, became another subject of scrutiny when detectives received an anonymous tip suggesting he might have had a motive. Angela had reportedly declined to sign with a sports agent recommended by him, potentially jeopardizing lucrative future contracts. When questioned, the coach admitted disappointment but denied any ill intent. His alibi for the night of the murder, corroborated by phone records and witness statements, further dismissed him as a suspect. Attention then turned to Layla, the team's former starting defender, who had been vocal about her dissatisfaction after Angela replaced her in the starting lineup. Multiple teammates described Layla as visibly frustrated in recent weeks, even making pointed remarks about Angela's rapid rise. When confronted, Layla acknowledged her resentment but provided an airtight alibi. She had spent the evening at home with her family, whose statements were consistent with her timeline. Surveillance footage from her neighborhood further confirmed her location that night, eliminating her as a suspect. As these leads failed to yield results, the detectives probed deeper into the dynamics within the team. Rumors about drug use among a few players emerged, prompting investigators to conduct thorough background checks and toxicology screenings. While minor infractions involving recreational substances surfaced, none implicated Angela or provided a motive for her murder. It became evident that this angle was another misdirection. The turning point came when investigators gained access to Angela's social media accounts. Hidden among mundane posts and generic updates, they found private messages and photographs that revealed a side of Angela's life she had kept well hidden. The messages highlighted her close relationship with Nicole, another member of the team. The photos painted an even clearer picture, Angela and Nicole holding hands, exchanging affectionate glances, and kissing. These images confirmed that the two had been in a romantic relationship, which they had carefully concealed from their teammates and the public. Detectives began scrutinizing the timeline of Angela and Nicole's interactions, cross-referencing the messages with the events leading up to the murder. The tone of the correspondence changed noticeably in the final weeks, shifting from warm and loving to strained and tense. Angela had repeatedly expressed a desire to make their relationship public, while Nicole's responses were more cautious, emphasizing her fear of potential backlash from the team and the community. While the discovery added a new dimension to the case, it also complicated the investigation. Nicole's connection to Angela made her a person of interest, but there was still no direct evidence tying her to the crime. Detectives reviewed her initial interview, noting inconsistencies in her account of the evening. Her claim of being home during the time of the murder was vague, with no concrete witnesses to confirm her whereabouts. As the third day of the investigation closed, the case was riddled with contradictions and unanswered questions. Theories that once seemed plausible, illegal betting, internal rivalries, and drug-related conflicts, had all but collapsed. The revelation of Angela and Nicole's relationship shifted the focus, suggesting a more personal motive behind the crime. With new information in hand, investigators prepared to intensify their questioning, determined to piece together the events that led to Angela's tragic death. Detectives turned their focus on Nicole after uncovering her romantic relationship with Angela Roberts. During questioning, Nicole reluctantly admitted the nature of their connection. She described their relationship as intense and deeply emotional but fraught with secrecy. According to her account, Angela had grown increasingly insistent on making their relationship public, frustrated by the need to hide their love. Nicole, however, feared the potential consequences. As a player in a sport still battling stereotypes and societal expectations, she worried that revealing their relationship might alienate their teammates, draw unwanted media attention, and jeopardize their careers. Investigators dug deeper into Nicole's background, discovering that she and Angela had a shared history dating back to Angela's pre-Richmond years. Both women had played for the same amateur rugby team in their hometown, forming a close bond that later blossomed into a romantic relationship. Angela's relocation to Richmond for better career opportunities had initially strained their connection, but Nicole followed a year later, joining the same professional team. While they maintained the pretense of being merely teammates, those close to them hinted at an unspoken tension between the two, which, in retrospect, now seemed like attempts to mask their true relationship. As Nicole recounted these details, her statements regarding the night of Angela's murder raised more questions than answers. Initially, she claimed to have spent the evening at home, preparing for the next day's practice. However, her timeline lacked specificity, and she could not provide a credible alibi. No one had seen her during the hours in question, and her phone records showed a gap in activity. This silence in her digital footprint aligned with the time frame of Angela's death, drawing further suspicion. Detectives also reviewed footage from the stadium's cameras, paying particular attention to the mysterious figure in a hoodie who had accompanied Angela the previous evening. The gait and height matched Nicole's profile, but the footage was too grainy to make a definitive identification. When confronted with this evidence, Nicole grew visibly nervous, her demeanor shifting from cooperative to guarded. Her hesitation, coupled with inconsistencies in her account, deepened the detectives' doubts. Meanwhile, additional interviews with other teammates revealed further insights into Angela and Nicole's dynamic. One player described observing heated exchanges between the two in recent weeks, often occurring during or after practice sessions. While these incidents were dismissed as professional disagreements, they now took on a more personal context. Another teammate recalled seeing Angela leaving the locker room in tears a few days before her death, though she refused to speculate on the cause. Forensic analysis of Angela's personal belongings yielded another breakthrough. Hidden within her gym bag was a folded piece of paper containing what appeared to be a handwritten letter addressed to Nicole. The letter expressed Angela's frustration over their secrecy and her determination to live openly, regardless of the consequences. Investigators saw this as a potential trigger for conflict, especially given Nicole's previously expressed fears. As these revelations came to light, detectives reevaluated Nicole's role in the investigation. While her connection to Angela was undeniable, the lack of concrete evidence meant that they still needed more to establish her culpability. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses was subpoenaed to trace Nicole's movements on the night of the murder. Forensic teams re-examined the stadium's locker room and surrounding areas, searching for overlooked evidence that might tie Nicole to the crime. By the end of the fourth day, the case had shifted dramatically. Nicole's account of their relationship shed light on Angela's personal struggles, but also cast a shadow over her own actions. The detectives now faced the challenge of separating truth from deception as they worked to piece together the final moments of Angela's life. Detectives intensified their focus on Nicole, whose inconsistencies and evasiveness during questioning had already raised red flags. With mounting evidence and growing pressure, Nicole's carefully constructed narrative began to unravel. Confronted with the surveillance footage from the stadium and the handwritten letter found in Angela's bag, Nicole's demeanor shifted from defensive to visibly strained. Investigators noted her increasingly erratic responses and physical signs of stress, such as trembling hands and averted eye contact. It became clear that Nicole was withholding crucial details about the night of Angela's death. Under sustained questioning, Nicole eventually broke down, admitting that she had met Angela on the empty lot near the stadium on the night of the murder. She described how Angela had summoned her there, insisting they needed to talk. Angela, according to Nicole's confession, had been resolute in her decision to reveal their relationship to the team and their community. Angela's ultimatum was clear: either they embraced their love openly, or she could no longer endure the strain of secrecy. Nicole confessed that her initial reaction to Angela's determination was fear. She had spent months suppressing her own feelings, driven by an overwhelming anxiety about how their relationship might be perceived. The thought of becoming the subject of gossip or jeopardizing her position on the team had consumed her. That fear, coupled with Angela's insistence, led to a heated confrontation. Nicole claimed that Angela's unwavering resolve had felt like a threat to everything she had worked for. As emotions escalated, Nicole admitted that she lost control. In a moment of panic and rage, she grabbed a piece of training equipment, a heavy rugby training tool that had been left on a nearby bench. She swung it at Angela, striking her on the back of the head. The force of the blow was sufficient to render Angela unconscious, and Nicole claimed she only realized the extent of the injury moments later, as Angela lay motionless on the ground. Overcome with shock and horror, Nicole's instincts turned to self-preservation. She described frantically removing Angela's belongings, including her wallet, phone, and jewelry, to make the scene appear as though it had been a robbery gone wrong. She then fled the scene, discarding Angela's items in a nearby storm drain before returning home to compose herself. Detectives corroborated parts of Nicole's confession through forensic evidence. The blood splatter pattern at the scene matched Nicole's description of the attack. Angela's missing belongings were recovered from the location Nicole had indicated, further substantiating her account. The training equipment used in the attack was also found, bearing traces of Angela's blood and hair. Nicole's attempt to stage the crime as a robbery was methodical but ultimately flawed. Investigators noted that the lack of defensive wounds on Angela's body and the localized nature of the injury were inconsistent with a typical robbery scenario. Moreover, the absence of any signs of a struggle suggested that the attacker was someone Angela knew and trusted, narrowing the field of suspects. As Nicole recounted the events of that night, her tone alternated between remorse and self-justification. She acknowledged the gravity of her actions, but repeatedly emphasized her fear and the emotional turmoil that led to the confrontation. While her confession filled in critical gaps in the timeline, it also raised questions about whether her actions were premeditated or a tragic moment of impulse. The confession marked a turning point in the investigation. Nicole was immediately placed under arrest, and charges of second-degree murder were filed. As news of her arrest spread, the community grappled with the shocking betrayal at the heart of Angela's death. For the detectives, the case was nearing its conclusion, but the weight of Nicole's actions and Angela's tragic end left a lingering sense of devastation. Nicole's arrest marked a critical moment in the case, signaling both a resolution to the investigation and the beginning of a reckoning for all those involved. Following her confession, she was taken into custody without resistance. The evidence against her, combined with her own detailed account of the events, left no room for doubt about her culpability. The rugby training tool she had used as the murder weapon, now stained with Angela's blood, was recovered from a storage area near the stadium. Forensic analysts confirmed it matched the dimensions and weight consistent with the injury Angela had sustained. Nicole's fingerprints on the weapon solidified the case against her. In custody, Nicole provided a formal statement, reiterating the circumstances that led to the crime. She admitted to striking Angela in a moment of uncontrollable fear and panic. Her account painted a picture of a person consumed by the pressure to conform, torn between her love for Angela and her overwhelming dread of judgment. Nicole insisted she had not intended to kill Angela but conceded that her actions were inexcusable. Her fear, she said, had outweighed her love, driving her to a choice that could never be undone. The police completed their investigation within days of Nicole's arrest. Her confession, corroborated by physical evidence and witness statements, allowed the case to move swiftly toward prosecution. Angela's personal belongings, discarded in a storm drain, were recovered and returned to her grieving family. The evidence was meticulously catalogued, and prosecutors prepared charges of second-degree murder against Nicole, emphasizing the impulsive yet deliberate nature of her actions. News of Nicole's arrest spread quickly, leaving the community in shock. Angela had been a beloved figure in Richmond, celebrated for her athletic prowess and her potential to achieve greatness. Her death, already a tragedy, was now revealed as the result of a betrayal by someone she trusted deeply. The Richmond Hounds rugby team, devastated by the loss of one of their star players, faced an outpouring of support from fans and the wider sports community. Angela's funeral drew a large crowd, including teammates, coaches, and members of the local rugby league. The ceremony was a somber affair, marked by tearful eulogies and shared memories of Angela's dedication and kindness. Her parents, though visibly heartbroken, expressed gratitude for the community's support. During the service, members of the Richmond Hounds announced their intention to dedicate their upcoming tournament performance to Angela's memory, vowing to honor her legacy through their commitment on the field. Nicole's arrest and the revelations surrounding Angela's death ignited broader conversations about the pressures faced by athletes, particularly those navigating complex personal identities in a competitive and public environment. Sports analysts and psychologists weighed in, discussing the culture of silence and fear that had contributed to the tragedy. While many condemned Nicole's actions, others expressed empathy for the internal struggles that had culminated in such a catastrophic decision. As Nicole awaited trial, she remained in a state of visible remorse. Jailhouse interviews with her attorney revealed a woman grappling with the enormity of her actions. She reportedly spent her time writing letters to Angela's family and teammates, expressing her sorrow and seeking forgiveness. These letters, though heartfelt, did little to assuage the anger and grief felt by those who had lost a friend, a teammate, and a role model. The investigation's conclusion left a profound impact on the city of Richmond. Angela's death was not only a loss to her family and team, but also a stark reminder of the destructive power of fear and secrecy. For Nicole, her arrest marked the beginning of a long journey of accountability, as she prepared to face the legal consequences of her actions. For Angela's team and community, her memory became a rallying point for change, inspiring efforts to foster greater openness and support within the world of sports. Nicole was sentenced to 15 years in prison after a swift and highly publicized trial. Her confession and the overwhelming forensic evidence left little room for doubt, and the court handed down a sentence that reflected the gravity of her crime. The trial, which drew significant media attention, served as a painful recounting of Angela's tragic death and a deeper exploration of the pressures and fears that had led Nicole to commit such an irreversible act. Angela's family, while expressing profound grief, emphasized their hope that her death would spark important conversations about acceptance and the emotional struggles faced by young athletes. Inside the prison, Nicole found herself consumed by regret. Isolated from her former life and the sport she loved, she began documenting her thoughts and experiences in a notebook provided by the prison's mental health program. Over time, these writings evolved into a manuscript detailing her relationship with Angela, the fears that had driven her actions, and the catastrophic consequences of her decisions. Titled Fear, Love, and the Line I Crossed, the book offered a raw and unflinching account of the events leading up to the crime. Nicole expressed her hope that by sharing her story, she could prevent others from succumbing to similar fears and making destructive choices. Outside the prison walls, Angela's legacy took on a new form. The Richmond Hounds rugby team, still reeling from the loss of their teammate, decided to honor Angela's memory by establishing the Angela Roberts Memorial Fund. This charitable foundation focused on providing scholarships and mentorship programs for young female athletes, particularly those facing financial or social barriers. The fund's mission was to ensure that promising players like Angela had the resources and support they needed to thrive both on and off the field. The foundation quickly gained traction, with local businesses, sports organizations, and community leaders rallying behind its cause. Annual tournaments were organized in Angela's name, drawing teams from across the region to compete and raise funds for the program. Her parents, though still grieving, became active participants in the foundation's initiatives, attending events and sharing Angela's story as a source of inspiration for young athletes. Within the team, Angela's memory became a symbol of resilience and unity. The tragedy prompted a shift in the team's culture, encouraging open discussions about personal struggles and fostering a stronger sense of camaraderie. Coaches and players implemented new measures to support mental health and inclusivity, ensuring that no member of the team felt the need to hide their true self. These changes, while born from a painful event, helped the Richmond Hounds rebuild and strengthen their bond, both as a team and as individuals. In the broader sports community, Angela's story ignited conversations about the pressures faced by LGBTQ+ athletes and the importance of creating safe and supportive environments in competitive sports. Advocacy groups and organizations used her case as an example of the need for systemic change, pushing for greater awareness and policies to protect athletes from discrimination and stigmatization. Nicole's book, published several years into her sentence, became a subject of both praise and controversy. Some saw it as a genuine act of remorse and a valuable lesson for others, while critics argued that it sought to profit from Angela's death. The proceeds from the book were donated to the Angela Roberts Memorial Fund, a gesture that, while appreciated, could never undo the harm caused. As time passed, Angela's name remained a touchstone for the Richmond community. Her story, though tragic, became a catalyst for growth and change. The foundation continued to expand its reach, touching the lives of countless young athletes. The Richmond Hounds carried her spirit into every match, dedicating their successes to the teammate they had lost. And while Nicole remained behind bars, her story served as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the devastating consequences of fear and the power of love to inspire courage and change.